Good morning. We are ready to start our last colony, Pennsylvania. But before we do, we're going to review a little bit about yesterday and Monday. I'm going to slide that back a smidge. And I'm going to read you a little section called New Netherlands. I'm reading out of this book, What Your Third Grader Needs to Know. By 1700, British North America had grown into a bustling, rowdy place. Up and down the Atlantic seaboard, colonists of many different regions, religions, and backgrounds made their homes. Most of these colonists came from England, but the area we now call New York, which started out as New Netherland, belonged to the Dutch. You might remember that Henry Hudson, sailing for the Dutch East India Company, has claimed this area for Holland. Holland is also called the Netherlands. It is in Europe. It's a tiny country, but it's also a powerful country with a strong navy, and it had many colonies all around the world. The Dutch wanted to turn New Netherland into a fur trading post, but first they needed more land. So in 1626, they bought a neighboring island from the local Manhattan Indians. The legend says that the Dutch bought the island for a bunch of beads worth $24. You might think, what a bargain, especially since the island they bought is what we now call Manhattan, the heart of today's New York City. Soon windmills were going up everywhere as Dutch colonists built the port town of New Amsterdam on the tip of Manhattan Island. They planned to grow rich by shipping furs from this location. French, Germans, Swedes, and Finns came to settle in the colony, as did the black people from Brazil. The Jews from Spain and Portugal made a home with the Dutch as well. When you walk down the streets of New Amsterdam, you could hear more than a dozen different languages, much as you can in New York City today. But the Dutch seemed more interested in their colonies in India and South America, and they failed to set up a good government in New Netherland. Everybody fought and argued. No one could make the colony work. The British decided to take advantage of the confusion, and in 1664, English ships sailed into New Amsterdam demanding that the Dutch surrender the colony to King Charles II. Then Charles gave it as a gift to his brother, the Duke of York, who changed the name to his own, New York. That land now forms part of New York and New Jersey today. Okie dokie. That is New Netherlands, and that's a little bit about what we talked about the last couple days. Remember, we learned that Peter Stuyvesant was not able to defend New Amsterdam against the British invasion, and there were three major reasons. Number one, he didn't have any gunpowder. He couldn't fire his cannons. Number two, he did not have enough soldiers. And three, probably the biggest reason, is that the Dutch refused to fight. They wanted him to surrender. They were a peaceful people. They didn't want to fight. So he was able to take over New York. That was New Amsterdam at the time, but New York City now, without firing a single shot. Okay, I got a little bit I want to read to you about Pennsylvania. In 1681, William Penn received a grant of land from the English king to repay a loan that Penn's father had made to an earlier monarch. Penn was to be the sole proprietor of a huge tract of land, and at the king's suggestion, he named the land Pennsylvania, which is Latin for Penn's Woods. Penn was a member of the Society of Friends, a Protestant group known familiarly as the Quakers. Quakers believed that all people had something of God in them and were therefore equal. Everyone was equal. There were no people who were better than anyone else. They believed that every man and woman had direct access to God. We did not need an intermediary. It followed that there was no need for priests or churches or for elaborate costumes or rituals or even dogma and creeds. At their meetings, the Quakers would often keep silent and there was no planned program. They referred to themselves as friends of the truth, or sometimes just friends. Quakers refused to support the state church. They did not swear oaths in court, and they would not fight in wars. Like the Puritans, the Pilgrims, and the Roman Catholics, the Quakers were persecuted in England for their religious beliefs. Penn hoped to make Pennsylvania a haven not just for his fellow Quakers, but for people of all religions. Because of the Quaker beliefs, slavery was banned, and small farms rather than plantations developed in that colony. We're going to roll on over to our map. Look at us flying back through time. Okay, I'm going to grab that pointer. And of course, put a huge glare. There we go. No glare now. And Pennsylvania is the colony that we're talking about right now. Whoops, you can't see that. Pennsylvania. Here is New York. We just talked about that yesterday and the day before. Pennsylvania. Here's New Jersey. Remember the four middle colonies: New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware. These are the four middle colonies. And originally, Delaware was part of Pennsylvania. See how it's kind of connected like that? So New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, those are the four middle colonies right there. And today we're talking about Pennsylvania. Let's go flying back through time. Well, actually flying forward through time. Whoosh. Back down here, we are all the way down to the late 1600s. Down there. The late 1600s. All right, that's where we are. But before we start on that, I want to read again from this book, What Your Third Grader Needs to Know. I'm going to read The Refuge for Other Religions, Maryland and Pennsylvania. Soon, other English colonies stretched between New England and Virginia. Like Massachusetts Bay, Pennsylvania and Maryland were started by people seeking religious freedom. Remember, most of the colonies were started by people seeking religious freedom. This country, the United States of America, started out as the 13 original colonies with people who came here for religious freedom. This country was founded on a firm religious Christian beliefs. That's how this country was founded in the 13 original colonies. First, let's learn how Pennsylvania became a refuge or a safe place for the Quakers, who were being treated badly in England at the time. Their real name was a Society of Friends, but the English called them Quakers because the Friends appeared to rock or quake when they prayed. Quakers didn't believe in churches or religious ceremonies. They thought that war was wrong and they refused to fight. They believed loyal to anyone but God was wrong, so they could not give their loyalty to the king. Quakers believed that God spoke to each individual and guided him or her through an inner light in his or her soul. They said that people did not need to listen to the priests or the ministers or even study the Bible. Instead, they simply needed to sit quietly and learn to be guided by the inner light. In God's eyes, the Quakers said, all people are equal. And so they would not bow to dukes or lords or any members of the upper class in England. You can imagine what kind of a problem that caused. Those guys with their huge egos, and they wouldn't bow down to them. William Penn, a wealthy and well-educated gentleman and the son of a famous British naval hero, joined the Society of Friends when he was very young. His father wanted him to stay in the Church of England, but Penn clung to his beliefs, and even though he was thrown into jail, he continued to hold them. After his father died, William Penn went to see King Charles II. The king had borrowed money from William's father, and now Penn wanted to be paid back. For years, Penn had dreamed of starting a holy experiment, a Quaker colony in North America, and he asked the king to pay him back with land instead of money. The king gave Penn 29 million acres, an area larger than England itself. Penn wanted to name it Sylvania, which means woods. The king suggested that William honor his father by calling the land Pennsylvania, Penn's woods. When the Quakers believed that all men and women were equal in God's eyes, they included Native Americans and Africans. The Quakers were among the first people to say that slavery was wrong. They did not believe that anyone should own another person. William Penn wasted no time. He printed brochures urging people to come to Pennsylvania where brotherly love will guide us all. Pennsylvania welcomed not just Quakers, but people of all religions. Remember, they were very tolerant of all religions, including Jews and Catholics, who were persecuted heavily in Europe. By 1682, there were 4,000 colonists in Pennsylvania. By 1700, there were 18,000. People came from Germany, Holland, Scotland, and other countries. For the capital of the colony, Penn chose a site on the Delaware River and named it Philadelphia, which means city of brotherly love. We will also come to know it as the plans of a planned city. Penn helped plan the city. He laid out the streets in an orderly crisscross pattern. Philadelphia quickly grew into a busy port town, one of the colony's most important cities. In 1776, when the colonies declared their independence from British, the southern part of Pennsylvania became the state of Delaware. And that was that little chunk I was telling you about at the bottom. That became Delaware. All righty, let's go ahead and get out. Well, you don't have to get it out. I'm getting it out. You can follow along in the PDF. All right, we're starting with William Penn and the Quakers. An important letter. William Penn sat at his desk in his large house in England. He looked down at the charter in front of him. The King of England had signed the charter and it was dated 1681. The charter gave William Penn the right to start a colony in North America. The name of the colony would be Pennsylvania, which means Penn's Woods. Before he left England, Penn wrote a letter to the Native Americans who lived in his new colony. First, Penn told the Native Americans that he and his colonists would sail to North America soon. They planned to arrive in the summer of 1682. Next, Penn told the Native Americans that he knew they had been mistreated by the English colonists in the past. He promised that the Pennsylvania colonists would be kind and fair. Any colonist who harmed a Native American would be punished. Penn ended his letter by saying that he had great love and respect for the Native Americans, and he hoped to win their love and their friendship. William Penn was a Quaker. The Quakers belonged to a religious group called the Society of Friends. The Quakers' way of worship was very different from worship in the Church of England. The Quakers did not have ministers who gave sermons. When the Quakers met in their meeting house, they prayed silently. During the meeting, anyone who felt inspired by God could stand up and speak to the others. The Friends believed that all people were equal and should be treated with respect. They believed that the aristocracy was no better than the other people. The aristocracy is the upper class or the noble class whose member status is usually inherited. So when you hear people talk about aristocracy, they're usually talking about descendants of kings and queens. So that's their noble status. But aristocracy in England did not agree. They expected everyone to bow to them and call them my lord or my lady. Because the Bible says, thou shalt not kill, the Quakers believed all wars were wrong. The Quakers would not join in the armies or fight wars. The Quakers had many enemies in England. Some thought that the Friends were troublemakers. The government disliked them because they said war was wrong. The Church of England was angry with the Quakers' religious ideas, as you can imagine. And as a result, many Quakers were put in prison for their beliefs. Life in England became harder and harder for the Society of Friends. William Penn was perhaps the best known Quaker in England. And because of his Quaker beliefs, he had been sent to prison several times. Okay, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what we have just read. How did William Penn differ from other Englishmen of his time? How was he different from them? Well, he was a Quaker, which did make him different, but also he had a great respect and love of Native Americans. And he wished to treat them fairly when he arrived in North America. When he arrived in the 13 colonies, he wanted to treat the Native Americans fairly. And that was very different than the way the other English people treated the Native Americans. Also, William Penn Didn't believe, because he was a Quaker, he didn't believe that he should bow down to the aristocracy of the English um, of the English system. So, lords and ladies and barons and earls and dukes and queens and kings and princes and princesses, he thought everybody was equal. Quakers believed that, and they did not respect the aristocracy any more than they respected anybody else. How did the Quakers' way of worship differ from worship in the Church of England? Mhm. In the Church of England, they had a minister, which we learned was somebody who gives a sermon, which we know is a religious speech given on a religious topic by a religious leader. That's what a sermon is. They didn't believe that they didn't give or listen to long sermons. They didn't think that they needed ministers or priests. They prayed silently when they met in their meeting houses, and anybody who felt inspired by God could speak because they believed that people do not need an intermediary to God, that everybody had direct access to God, and you didn't need a priest or a minister or anybody in between talking to God for you. What were two beliefs that were strongly held by the Quakers? Well, we already talked about one, that all people were created equal and everybody should be respected. And they also believed that killing was wrong and they refused to fight in wars. They would not fight at all. Why were many Quakers, including William Penn, put into jail? Well, they were put into jail because of their religious beliefs. The King of England pretty much controlled the church, and he disagreed with their religious beliefs. So these people were put into jail because of their religious beliefs. They were persecuted. That's what it's called, persecuted because of their religious beliefs. All right, settling Pennsylvania. William Penn was a good person to lead a colony. He was a lawyer and a town planner. He was also just a man who treated all people fairly. A just man, not just a man. He was a just man. Penn called his colony a holy experiment, and he wanted Pennsylvania to be a place where Quakers and other religious groups could live together in harmony. Penn also opened his new colony to people who were not Quakers. To advertise his colony, Penn printed booklets. In his booklets, he told about the beauty of the land, and he promised religious freedom for everyone who settled in Pennsylvania. Penn helped design the city of Pennsylvania, the first major city in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, I'm sorry, the first major city in Pennsylvania. In Greek, the name Philadelphia means brotherly love. This name was very fitting for a Quaker city. William Penn's plan for the city looked like a checkerboard. He laid out the streets in that pattern. He gave numbers to all of the streets that ran from the north to the south. And he gave tree names like pine and walnut and spruce to streets that ran from the east to the west. He put in a central square where people could meet, and he planned many parks and gardens. Penn did not have walls or stockades built around Philadelphia. He said it was a city where everyone would live in peace. Soon, other colonial towns used Penn's plan as an example. Philadelphia grew very quickly. The colonists could not build houses fast enough. Some colonists had to live in caves along the banks of the Delaware River while they built their houses. William Penn soon returned to England, and he spent less than 4 years of his life in Pennsylvania. He spent most of his time in England defending the rights of the settlers in Pennsylvania. Now, a stockade is a defensive wall, and it's usually made up from stakes or poles that are pounded into the ground. So, a stockade would be like a pole here. The poles would be very close together, so people couldn't squeeze between them, and it would be around the entire town, and it was its defense system to keep people out. But William Penn didn't believe that Pennsylvania needed a defense system because they welcomed everybody. Why did Penn call his colony a holy experiment? Mhm. Because he wanted Pennsylvania to be a place where Quakers and all other religious groups could live together in perfect harmony. That's what he wanted. Why did Penn give out booklets about Pennsylvania? Yeah, he wanted to attract more people to the colonies. So this was his way of advertising to different people from many different lands and different countries. How did William Penn organize the city of Philadelphia? He did. He laid out the streets like a checkerboard, and he numbered the streets from north to south with numbers and from east to west. They were tree names so that it would be easy. You could say, I live at 503 Pine Street, and everybody would know right away. They could visualize it in their head. Okay, that's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's right there. It's going to be in the fifth block. And we need to find Pine Street. Oh, here's Pine Street. So it's going to be somewhere in here. That made it very easy. He also planned central squares and parks where people could meet. I think that's all. All right, next section, the Delaware Valley settlers. People from all over Europe settled in Pennsylvania for many reasons. They came for religious freedom. They came because they could afford to buy the rich farmland and the climate was mild for farming. They came for the promise of good trade. And they also came because the colony was at peace with the Native Americans. Two other middle colonies were also located along the Delaware River Valley, New Jersey and Delaware. Before William Penn's colony, Dutch and Swedish settlements existed in both of those areas. When England took over New Netherland and named it New York, the king made New Jersey an English colony too. And at the beginning of the 1700s, some Pennsylvania settlers formed the new colony of Delaware. It did not take long for Philadelphia to become an important city in the colonies. Philadelphia was a busy port and trading center. Land in Philadelphia, Delaware, and New Jersey was very fertile. Farmers prospered in all three colonies. Farmers sold their crops in Philadelphia. Ships loaded with flowers and grains and dried fruit sailed to other ports in the colonies. The ships also sailed across the Atlantic Ocean to England and Europe. Because there was so much trade in Philadelphia, there were many kinds of jobs. People worked as farmers, bankers, blacksmiths, tool makers, tailors, and glassmakers. People also worked as teachers, printers, booksellers, and lawyers. As Philadelphia grew, the city built paved streets and raised sidewalks with curbs. At night, lamps burned whale oil to light the main streets. Most people in Philadelphia lived in small brick houses, but in the 1700s, a few wealthy people built big houses. They filled them with beautiful furniture and art. Because of trade and the mixing of cultures, Philadelphia became a great center for new ideas. As time went on, people in Philadelphia built a college, a theater, and America's first hospital. They also built a museum, a public library, and started a scientific society. By 1776, when the American colonies rebelled against the British rule and declared their independence, Philadelphia was the largest city in the 13 colonies. In fact, it was the second largest English speaking city in the entire world, second only to London. Now, independence is freedom from the control of a person or from a group of people. Why did people come to Pennsylvania? Yeah, they could afford to buy land there because the land was cheap. They also were promised religious freedom. Everybody could practice there. And the big reason is that that colony itself, Pennsylvania, was at peace with the Native Americans. The farmland was rich, the climate was good, and there was a promise of good trade, but they were at peace with the Native Americans, which was very important to some people. What helped the city of Philadelphia grow? Well, it was really fertile farmland for one thing in the region. And then the city became an important trade center because of the Delaware River. How did the city of Philadelphia change over time? Uh-huh. As the city grew, the colonists paved the streets and they raised the sidewalks with curbs on them. They put lamps on the streets to burn at night so that there would be light. They built a college, a theater, a museum, public library, and the first American hospital was built in Philadelphia. Yeah, Philadelphia was a pretty important city. It was the largest colonial city when the United States declared independence from Britain in 1776. It was the largest city in the colonies. Why might Philadelphia have been a place that the Europeans would want to move to? Yep, the area around Philadelphia had very fertile and affordable land. That was one big reason. The city was an important center of trade. The city offered many amenities like the library, the museum, the hospital, those sorts of things. And it became a very desirable place for people to live. And that colony was living at peace with the Native Americans. Okay, that's all I have for you today. You're thinking, well, that's probably enough. It is, but we'll be back tomorrow and we'll talk a little bit more about the Quakers and Philadelphia and William Penn. And we'll take some notes on chapter 16 and label our map of Philadelphia. You guys have a great day, and I'll be back tomorrow. Bye bye.